This can't be your daughter.
She is my daughter.
You are under arrest.
The sound came first. Not the children laughing near the swings. Not the ducks paddling across the pond. Not the rustling leaves or distant traffic hum. It was metal. Sharp. Final. The unmistakable click of handcuffs opening. Stephanie Williams didn't know what handcuffs were for, not really. She'd seen them on television, on cartoon bad guys, on superheroes catching villains. But she knew, in the way children always know, that they didn't belong here. Not in the park. Not in the sunlight. Not pointed at her father. Her fingers tightened around John Williams' wrist. Instinct faster than thought. 10 minutes earlier, they'd been tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks. 5 minutes earlier, she'd been giggling as a particularly bold mallard waddled right up to her shoes. Now, a white patrol car sat motionless behind them. An officer stood 3 feet away. And something invisible and suffocating had crawled into the space between her father and the rest of the world. If you believe no parent should ever have to prove their own child belongs to them, hit that like button. Subscribe if you think this story needs to be told. And comment below where you're watching from today, because silence is how injustice stays hidden. Officer Mark Tucker had stepped into their path without warning. One moment, the afternoon had been bright and easy. Riverside Park stretched wide and green under a cloudless Saturday sky. Stephanie had crumbs still clinging to her small palms. John had his phone out, mid-text to his wife Annie, telling her they'd be home in 20 minutes. The next moment, Tucker was there. Boots planted in the grass. Arms crossed. Jaw set. His first question cut through the birdsong like a blade. He demanded to know whose child Stephanie was. Not a question. A demand? John looked up slowly, deliberately. He'd been a black man in America long enough to know how fast calm could shatter. He kept both hands visible. Kept his voice level. Kept his body language open and non-threatening. He told the officer calmly that she was his daughter. Tucker's gaze flicked between them. John's dark skin. Stephanie's blonde hair catching the sunlight. Her green eyes wide and confused. Her freckled cheeks. The officer's eyes lingered on the contrast as if it were evidence in itself. Tucker asked again if John was telling him the child was his. John reached slowly for his back pocket, narrating every movement aloud. He explained he was reaching for his wallet. He was pulling out his driver's license. He was holding it out with steady fingers. Tucker took it. Studied it. His eyes scanned the name, John Williams, then shifted to Stephanie, still clutching her father's hand. Tucker crouched down to Stephanie's level. His voice softened, but the suspicion didn't. He asked her what her name was. Stephanie shrank back against her father's leg. Her voice came out small and uncertain as she told him her name was Stephanie Williams. The matching last names didn't soften Tucker's expression. If anything, his jaw tightened. He stood, circling them slowly now, eyes scanning the park as if expecting someone else to emerge. Parents on nearby benches had begun to notice. A jogger slowed. A woman with a stroller stopped mid-path, phone already rising toward the scene. Tucker handed the ID back without acknowledgement. He stated that he was going to need proof she was John's. John felt the ground shift beneath him. Proof. In a public park. On a Saturday afternoon. With his daughter's hand trembling in his. John explained that Stephanie was mixed race. Her mother was white. She was at work right now as a nurse at Mercy General. He offered to call her if Tucker needed him to. Tucker's tone turned cold as he responded that John could surely say that. The skepticism wasn't hidden anymore. It hung in the air, thick and ugly. Tucker's hand moved to his belt. Not the radio. The handcuffs. He ordered John to turn around. John's breath caught. Around them, more phones emerged. A man in a baseball cap had his camera aimed directly at Tucker's face. A teenager on a bike had stopped, filming. The crowd was growing, murmuring, but Tucker seemed not to notice, or not to care. Tucker commanded John to turn around immediately, informing him he was being detained on suspicion of child abduction. Stephanie's small fingers tightened around her father's leg. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She understood the metal thing in the officer's hand. She understood that her father's body had gone rigid. She called out to her daddy, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. John's voice stayed calm. Steady. The way he trained it to be. He told her it was okay, told her to stay close to him. But it wasn't okay. Tucker moved behind him, wrenching John's arm back with unnecessary force. Stephanie screamed. A raw, piercing sound that cut across the park and made every head turn. She shrieked that he was her daddy. The first cuff snapped shut. The sound was louder than Stephanie had imagined. Louder than anything. She clung to her father's waist, sobbing now, her small fists pounding uselessly against Tucker's arm. She screamed that he didn't steal her, that he was her daddy. Tucker ignored her. The second cuff locked into place. John stood perfectly still, hands bound behind his back, breathing controlled and deliberate. He could feel Stephanie shaking against him. Could hear her voice breaking. Could see the cameras now, dozens of them, pointed at his humiliation. Tucker keyed his radio and reported to dispatch that he was Unit 12, that he'd detained a possible child abduction suspect at Riverside Park, and was requesting backup. The words echoed across the open grass. A second patrol car rolled into the parking lot within minutes, lights off but presence heavy. The officer who stepped out, a younger man with cautious eyes, approached slowly, taking in the scene. The crowd. The cameras. The sobbing child. The handcuffed father standing motionless in the grass. He leaned toward Tucker, voice low, questioning what the probable cause was. Tucker's jaw tightened. He cited suspicious behavior, stating the child didn't match the suspect's description. The second officer glanced at Stephanie, still screaming and clinging to John's leg. He glanced at the watching crowd. He said nothing, but his unease was visible. Tucker gripped John's shoulder and steered him toward the cruiser. Stephanie stumbled after them, her small legs struggling to keep up. When Tucker opened the back door, she threw herself against it, tiny fists pounding the window. She begged them not to take her daddy, screaming the words over and over. John turned his head as much as the cuffs would allow, locking eyes with his daughter through the glass. His voice was calm. Gentle. The only thing he could still control. He called her name softly, told her to look at him, assured her he was okay, that daddy was okay. But Stephanie couldn't hear him through the glass. She couldn't hear anything except her own screaming. Tucker shut the door. The sound sealed. The bodycam on Tucker's chest captured every second. The civilian phones zoomed in. And John Williams sat in the back of a police cruiser, wrists bound, breathing slow and measured so his 5-year-old daughter wouldn't see him break. Tucker leaned against the open driver's door, arms folded, watching Stephanie claw at the cruiser window. His bodycam microphone caught everything. The sobs. The screams. And 3 muttered phrases, barely audible beneath the chaos, that no one in the park would notice. He muttered that sure, John was her father, not with that blonde hair. He turned slightly, glancing at the second officer, and said under his breath that they always had a story. Then, as he adjusted his belt, so quiet the words almost dissolved into the wind, he added that of course she was with him. The phrases vanished into the noise. The crowd didn't hear them. The second officer didn't react. Even Tucker himself seemed unaware he'd spoken aloud. But the bodycam microphone caught every syllable. Timestamped. Recorded. Saved. The siren stayed off, but the sound of screeching tires cut through the murmur of the crowd. A silver sedan jerked into the parking lot, tires biting gravel, and skidded to a stop near the cruiser. The door flew open before the engine even cut off. Annie Williams hit the pavement running. She was still in Navy hospital scrubs, her badge swinging from a lanyard around her neck, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Her eyes found Stephanie first, sobbing, red-faced, pounding on the glass, and then John, motionless in the back seat, wrists still cuffed behind him. Her fury was immediate. Controlled. Surgical. She scooped Stephanie into her arms, and the child buried her face in her mother's shoulder, gasping for air between sobs. Annie's gaze locked onto Tucker. She demanded to know why her husband was in handcuffs. Tucker straightened, his posture defensive. He began to explain that they've received a report of suspicious behavior involving a child. Annie cut him off, stating flatly that Stephanie was her daughter, John was her husband, and Tucker had put him in a police car in front of her. Tucker opened his mouth to respond, but Annie was already moving. She set Stephanie down gently, grabbed her purse from the front seat of the sedan, and pulled out a thick folder. She slapped it onto the hood of the cruiser. Her driver's license came first. Hospital ID next. Then a birth certificate. Delivery records from Mercy General. 3 family photos. John holding newborn Stephanie in the hospital, Stephanie's first birthday, last Christmas morning. Insurance cards. Pediatric vaccination records. Every document listed the same names: John Williams, Annie Williams, Stephanie Williams. Tucker barely glanced at them. The second officer, however, stepped closer. His expression shifted. Unease crept into his eyes as he scanned the paperwork, then looked back at John sitting restrained in the cruiser, then at Stephanie still trembling in her mother's arms. Another engine approached. A third patrol car rolled into the lot, and Sergeant Alan Reyes stepped out. He was older, gray at the temples, with the kind of weathered calm that came from years of reading scenes faster than rookies could explain them. He took in the crowd. The phones. The documents spread across the hood. The cuffed man in the back seat. The sobbing child. Tucker standing stiff and defensive. Reyes walked directly to the cruiser and looked through the window at John. He studied him for 3 seconds. Then he turned to Tucker and ordered him to get John out. Tucker hesitated, beginning to protest that he'd had reasonable suspicion. Reyes' voice didn't rise, but it cut clean. He repeated his command, stating he'd said to get him out now. Tucker moved to the cruiser door, his movements jerky and reluctant. He opened it. John stepped out slowly, blinking in the sunlight. Reyes gestured for the cuffs to be removed. Tucker complied, the metallic click of the release somehow louder than the lock had been. John rubbed his wrists. Red marks circled the skin. He didn't look at Tucker. He looked at Stephanie. She ran to him. He dropped to one knee and caught her, wrapping both arms around her small body as she buried her face in his shirt. Her trembling didn't stop. Neither did his. Reyes turned to Tucker, his voice calm and deliberate. He tapped the Bodycam on Tucker's chest and asked if Tucker knew this was all on camera. Tucker nodded stiffly. Reyes gestured to the crowd, where at least 24 phones were still raised, recording every second. He noted that they were recording too. The power dynamic flipped in real time. Tucker's jaw tightened. His hands clenched. But he said nothing. Reyes addressed the second officer, instructing him to write up the incident report with everything: timestamps, probable cause, or lack thereof. Then he looked at John and Annie, told them they were free to go, and offered his apology. Annie's voice was quiet but edged with steel as she responded that an apology didn't undo what her daughter had just witnessed. Reyes nodded. He didn't argue. John stood slowly, lifting Stephanie into his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist and didn't let go. Annie stepped beside him, her hand resting on the small of his back. Together, the 3 of them walked toward their car. The crowd parted. Phones lowered. A few people murmured words of support. One woman whispered that she'd gotten it all on video. Annie's arms slid around John's waist as they reached the sedan. Stephanie's sobs had quieted to hiccuping breaths, her face still hidden against her father's chest. Behind them, Tucker stood beside his cruiser, back straight, expression unreadable. He didn't know yet. Didn't know that his Bodycam had already betrayed him. Didn't know that the 3 muttered phrases, captured, timestamped, saved, would resurface in a federal deposition and rewrite the ending he believed he just controlled. What would you have done if you had been standing there with your phone out? Keep filming, step forward, or call someone? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and why this moment hit so hard. The Williams family drove away in silence. Tucker climbed back into his cruiser. And the Bodycam footage, already uploading automatically to the department's server, began its quiet journey toward a courtroom neither officer nor family yet knew was waiting. That same evening, Tucker sat in the precinct locker room and uploaded the full Bodycam and dashcam files to the department's public transparency portal. His hands moved with confidence. He'd reviewed the footage twice. Saw himself approaching a suspicious situation. Saw himself asking reasonable questions. Saw himself detaining a suspect pending verification. He saw procedure, professionalism, justification. He clicked submit and logged off. By midnight, the civilian videos had already started circulating. The first clip came from the woman with the stroller. 38 seconds. Stephanie's screams were clear and piercing, her voice declaring he was her daddy, that he didn't steal her. The video ended with John being placed in the cruiser, his face calm but his eyes devastated. The caption read that this was what racial profiling looked like. Within 2 hours, it had 12,000 shares. By Sunday morning, a teenager's TikTok version had gone viral. The algorithm loved it. 50-second cut. Zoomed in on Stephanie pounding the window. Text overlay noting she was 5 years old, he was her father, and the cop didn't care. The hashtag was already trending, #ParentingWhileBlack. By Sunday evening, the clip had 4 million views. News outlets picked it up Monday morning. Local affiliates first, then cable networks, then national morning shows. The story had every element producers craved: a child's terror, an unjust arrest, clear video evidence, and a resolution that didn't end in violence but demanded accountability. By Monday afternoon, the police department issued a terse statement. Officer Mark Tucker had been placed on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. The department expressed its commitment to transparency and community trust. The public wasn't satisfied. By Tuesday, Internal Affairs had launched a fast-tracked investigation. The report cited lack of probable cause, failure to verify guardianship through readily available means, and unnecessary escalation in the presence of a minor. The review board recommended termination pending further findings. John and Annie sat in a civil rights attorney's office on Wednesday. The lawyer's name was David Brennan. He'd built a career on cases like this, cases where the video evidence was undeniable, where the harm was visible, where the law had been bent until it snapped. He watched the bodycam footage once, watched the civilian videos twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at John and Annie across the desk. He laid out the strategy: federal lawsuit, wrongful detention, racial profiling, emotional distress, child psychological trauma. Annie's voice was quiet as she asked if it would matter. Brennan nodded, assuring them it would. They filed the lawsuit Thursday morning. The city's legal team responded with a settlement offer by Friday, $800,000. No admission of wrongdoing. Standard non-disclosure agreement. Closed the case quietly. Brennan slid the offer across the table to John and Annie, noting it was a strong offer, faster than most. Annie didn't touch the paper. She asked what it would cost them. Brennan tapped the NDA clause, explaining their silence would be the price. They'd take the money, they wouldn't talk about what happened. The video stayed public, but they wouldn't comment. Wouldn't do interviews. They'd move on. John looked at the number. $800,000. Enough to move. Enough to start over somewhere Stephanie wouldn't see patrol cars every day and freeze on the sidewalk. But not enough to make Tucker accountable for what he'd actually thought while his bodycam was recording. John looked at Annie. She met his eyes. No words. They didn't need them. John turned back to Brennan and stated they wanted full discovery, all bodycam audio, everything. Brennan smiled faintly, acknowledging that meant they'd keep going. The city's legal team resisted. Discovery was expensive, time-consuming, unnecessary when a generous settlement was already on the table. But Brennan pressed. Federal civil rights cases allowed broad discovery, and the Williams family had a right to every frame, every file, every audio track captured during the incident. The department turned over the files in early March. Brennan hired forensic audio specialists. The kind used in criminal trials to isolate voices from background noise, to enhance faint recordings, to pull signal from static. They worked in a soundproofed lab with software that could separate overlapping frequencies, clarify muddled speech, and timestamp every audible syllable. It took them 11 days. What they found changed everything. 3 phrases. Muttered low. Barely audible beneath Stephanie's sobs and the surrounding noise. But unmistakable once isolated and enhanced. Tucker muttering that sure, not with that blonde hair. That they always had a story. That of course she was with him. The audio engineers delivered the enhanced file with timestamps, waveform analysis, and a certified report confirming the speaker was Officer Mark Tucker. The phrases had been captured between 14 hours 32 minutes and 18 seconds and 14 hours 33 minutes and 41 seconds on the Bodycam recording. Tucker had muttered them while leaning against the cruiser, watching Stephanie scream through the glass. Brennan played the file once in his office. Then he called the city's legal team and requested a deposition date for Officer Tucker. The family's life had shifted in small, jagged ways. Stephanie no longer asked to go to the park. When a police car passed on the street, her hand would shoot out and grab John's wrist, her grip tight enough to hurt. At bedtime, she asked the same question every night, whether they were going to take him again. John's answer never changed. He told her no, that he was right here. But she asked anyway. Annie had gone quieter. She smiled less. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home, held her daughter, and said very little. The rage had settled into something deeper. Something that didn't need words. On the morning of the deposition, Brennan met John and Annie outside the federal building downtown. The air was cold. The sky overcast. Brennan carried a leather briefcase and a tablet with the enhanced audio file loaded and ready. Inside, they rode the elevator in silence. The deposition room was sterile and fluorescent lit. A court reporter sat ready. Tucker's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit, sat beside her client at the far end of the table. Tucker looked older. Thinner. His jaw was set, but his hands fidgeted with a pen. Brennan sat down. Opened his briefcase. Pulled out a slim transcript and slid it across the table. The trap was set. The court reporter swore Tucker in. His voice was steady. His posture upright. His lawyer sat beside him, calm and prepared. They'd run through this. Standard deposition procedure. Stick to the facts. Don't speculate. Don't apologize. Brennan started slow. He asked Tucker to describe his training, his years of service, his understanding of probable cause. Tucker answered each question with practiced confidence. Yes, he understood the legal standard. Yes, he'd followed department protocol. Yes, he'd had reasonable suspicion based on the visual discrepancy between the suspect and the child. Brennan let him talk. Then Brennan leaned forward slightly and asked whether Tucker had made any verbal statements during the incident that were not directed at Mr. Williams or any other individual present. Tucker blinked, stating he didn't recall making any statements like that. Brennan nodded. He tapped his tablet once. The screen lit up. He told Tucker he'd refresh his memory. He pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. Forensically enhanced. Every word isolated and amplified. Tucker's voice, unmistakable, muttering beneath the ambient noise. The first phrase, yeah, right, not with that blonde hair. Pause. The second, they always have a story. Pause. The third, of course she's with him. The room went silent. Tucker's face drained of color. His lawyer's pen stopped mid-note. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. Brennan let the silence stretch. Then he stopped the playback and asked Tucker if he recognized that voice. Tucker's throat moved. His lawyer's hand touched his arm, a silent signal. Tucker's voice came out hoarse as he requested a brief recess. Brennan leaned back, agreeing courteously. The recess lasted 18 minutes. When they returned, Tucker's lawyer looked like she'd aged a year. Tucker's hands were folded on the table, his knuckles white. The deposition continued, but the damage was done. Within 3 days, the city's settlement offer jumped from $800,000 to $1.8 million. The revised offer included explicit language. The increase was based on newly discovered evidence of conscious racial bias rather than procedural error. The offer came with a full public apology, immediate termination of Officer Tucker, and revocation of his law enforcement certification. Brennan called John and Annie into his office. He slid the new offer across the desk, noting this was as high as it would go. Annie read it twice. Then she looked at John. He nodded. They signed. The department issued the public apology 2 days later. It was read aloud at a press conference by the chief of police, who stood stiff and uncomfortable under the cameras. Officer Mark Tucker had been terminated effective immediately. His certification revoked. The department committed to implementing new training protocols focused on implicit bias, guardianship verification, and de-escalation in family contexts. The new training program rolled out 6 weeks later. It included a module titled What Officer Tucker Was Thinking versus What Officer Tucker Should Have Been Doing. The enhanced audio clips played in full, with on-screen subtitles highlighting each muttered phrase. Recruits sat in silence and listened. Veterans sat in silence and listened. The bodycam footage that Tucker had uploaded believing it vindicated him now served as a permanent warning. The microphone catches everything, including the thoughts you believe are private. 1 year later, Riverside Park looked exactly the same. The ducks still paddled across the pond. The swings still creaked in the breeze. The grass still stretched green and wide under the Saturday sun. John and Stephanie stood by the water's edge. She held a small bag of breadcrumbs, tossing them carefully, watching the ducks waddle closer. Her blonde hair caught the light. Her green eyes tracked the birds with quiet focus. John stood beside her, hands in his pockets. He watched her more than he watched the ducks. Her grip on his hand was still tighter than it used to be. When they'd parked the car, she'd hesitated before getting out, scanning the parking lot for patrol cars. When a jogger in a dark blue shirt passed too close, she'd step behind her father instinctively. But now, standing by the water, she let go of his hand. Took 2 steps forward. Tossed another piece of bread. A duck honked, and she smiled. It was a small smile. Cautious. But real. John exhaled slowly. Annie sat on a nearby bench, watching them. She was quieter now. Stronger in some ways. Quieter in others. She'd gone back to work, kept her shifts steady, kept the house running. But she didn't laugh as easily. Didn't trust as quickly. The settlement money sat in an account they barely touched. It had bought nothing that mattered. Couldn't buy back the afternoon. Couldn't erase the sound of Stephanie screaming through glass. Couldn't undo the moment John had been forced to stand handcuffed in front of his daughter and prove he had the right to be her father. But the training videos circulated. Every recruit in the state watched it. Every veteran reviewed it annually. The enhanced audio played in conference rooms and classrooms, subtitles glowing on screens. Tucker's muttered words about blonde hair and stories in doubt. Tucker's name was attached to it permanently. A cautionary tale. A warning. A reminder that bodycams don't just record actions, they record assumptions, biases, and the unfiltered thoughts officers believe will stay hidden. Stephanie threw the last piece of bread. The ducks scattered, satisfied. She turned back toward her father, brushed crumbs off her hands, and reached for him again. John took her hand. Her grip was firm. Familiar. Still tighter than before. They walked back toward the car together, Annie falling into step beside them. The park stretched quiet and bright behind them. The bodycam footage lived on, archived and permanent. The settlement had been paid. The apology issued. The officer fired. But Stephanie still asked, some nights, whether they were going to take him again. And John still answered, every time, that he was right here. The moment had been reclaimed. The park revisited. The ducks fed again. But some things, no settlement could erase.